Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Conjoint Analysis 102. During today's webinar, we're going to have a more in-depth look into conjoint analysis. We're going to look at some more generalized rules, as well as when to use specific elements of conjoint analysis during stages of innovation. We're going to look at survey flow optimization, and we're going to dive more in depth into things like the insights, segmentation, weighting, crosstabs, and things like that. So it's really an extension of Conjoint Analysis 101. But for those that haven't seen the first part, which was yesterday, I believe, I'll also make sure to have a bit of a recap at the start today. But before I start telling you anything about conjoint analysis again, let me first tell you a little bit about the platform we're using today. The platform today is hosted on Livestorm. Livestorm is a purely chat-based webinar program. So on the lower right corner, you can see the chat bubble. And this is where you can ask any and all questions that you might have. So if during today's webinar you have any questions, or if you already have a question and you just want to already put it in the chat and see when it gets answered, that's exactly what I'm here for. It makes the webinars a bit more interactive and entertaining for both you and for me. So if you have questions or remarks or just want to note something, please write in the chat. For those that want to have a look at the slides while I go through them, simply click on the apps button with the three dots. It should also be in the lower right corner, and then go to handouts. There you can find a PDF version of the slides for today. Okay, so that's a little bit about Livestorm. Now let's go over and jump to the left-hand side of my screen, and I'll start sharing my presentation on Conjoint Analysis 102. Again, just remember, if anything comes to mind or you want something clarified, that's exactly what I'm here for. So as you can see with the TV remote, today we're going to look at conjoint analysis through the lens of a decision that Netflix made, well, to be honest, already 3 months ago, I think now, but they haven't really clearly implemented it yet, namely, what's going to be the impact of including advertisement on a platform? Now, this is a research question that you can relatively easily set up and answer using a conjoint analysis. You can, of course, also use it for things like which versions of peanut butter is most preferred, what type of healthcare package do people like more, what is the monetary worth of subscription A versus B, and so on. So what I want to really highlight today is how versatile the tool is. So I'll start with a short introduction about Conjointly as well as myself. Just see that as the 30-second pitch meeting. Then I'm going to recap a little bit about what is conjoint analysis, just go over it in, let's say, 3 minutes or less. Then I'm going to dive in the stages of innovation, link it to the Netflix case study, as well as talking about things like ideal survey flow and a deeper dive into the results. So let's start that short pitch, and let me tell you briefly about what Conjointly is. So Conjointly is an all-in-one survey and research platform with a wide variety of tools. Now, these tools, of course, include conjoint analysis, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here today. But we have a wide scale of other options as well. So let me just show you a few. There are things like brand-specific conjoint and adapted version, MaxDiff, Gabor Granger, Van Wessendorp. Everything in blue is a magnetic variation, turf analysis simulator, and even the Kano. So there's a lot of different tools. We do both custom and automated work. I would say we probably balance that 50-50 with the automated tools really being developed in a way that everything is one click and easily accessible. In addition, I want to highlight the expert support. So the day starts in Christchurch, New Zealand with Harrigan. He gets up when I'm asleep. He's the first on support. Then it switches to our team in Australia, then Malaysia, then Europe, and eventually, first the East Coast, and eventually the day ends with Kirill in Santa Cruz on the West Coast. And what I want to highlight with that is, if you're ever on the Conjointly website, which looks like this, if you go to the chat with us bubble, we have this chat function, and that chat links directly to our market researchers. So if you have a question about something you want solved quickly, the chat is the best function. It's something most of our daily users use daily, basically. So whenever you have a question, that's exactly what we're here for. We have it on our second screen. So when we hear that bubble sound, bloop, pop up, we know, okay, let's see what one of our clients is curious about. So that's Conjointly. Then briefly about myself. My name is Stein Menzel. I'm a lecturer for quantitative market research here at Conjointly. I'm mainly focused on things like online webinars, as you can tell, but also training and creating materials to explain our products in a more simplistic manner. That's also my background. I worked for the better part of a decade in teaching courses mainly related to statistics, research methods, and psychology. So that's something I try to bring to this role as well. But enough about myself. Let's give a brief recap to Conjoint Analysis 101. For those that were wondering why today is called 102, that's because we also have a 101 course. Now, don't be too afraid if you haven't seen that one yet, because I will recap the most important element in the next 2 slides. But if you want to have a look at it, we have the webinars. I think we're switching now to once a month. It's on our YouTube channel. I think even 2 versions, one from me and one from the company owner, Nick, as well as our slide deck materials available online as well. So if you haven't seen it yet, it might be interesting to also have a look, but you don't have to do it immediately. So let's recap what we discussed there. So what I discussed yesterday. Conjoint analysis in its most simplistic terms means you have a product or service or anything, and you break it down into different components, and we try to figure out what combination of components the people like the most. That's the basic framework of a conjoint analysis. Now, to take it slightly more in depth, we have that product, in this case a smartphone. We break it down into our first component, which I call attributes. And those are basically the dimensions of a product, how you would describe it to somebody. So you would describe which brand it is, which screen size, which color, which price, and so on. So these are the overarching terms. And so we have a product in the first tier called attributes. So when it comes to a smartphone, that can also be cameras, that can be fingerprint sensor, that can be SD card slot, that can be operating system, that can be charging port, if I didn't say that already, and so on. Then we also have a second tier. The second tier is called levels. And levels is nothing more than any specific value we want to test for the attributes. So we're going to have an attribute called brand. Then the levels are going to be all the brand names we want to test. The attribute screen size. Then the levels are going to be all the different screen sizes we want to test and so on. So it's a very harmonious structure where we have a product. We break that down into attributes. And then we figure out what elements of the attributes we want to test using levels. Then all that we do is, once we've asked you to fill all this information in, so what are the attributes and levels you're interested in, we launch an experiment, and the experiment consists of choice tasks. And a choice task is nothing more than a task in which you have to choose. A simple terminology there. So here we can see there's 3 combinations, also known as alternatives, from which you can choose. And so on this choice task, we ask you to choose between an iPhone 5 inches in silver for $1,200, a Samsung 6 inches turquoise for $1,100, a Sony 5.5 inches in white for $1,000. So that is the general design. And what happens is somebody will choose. So let's say they pick out of the blue the Sony 5.5 inches in white for $1,000. Then they're shown another question like this and another. And roughly every individual in our group will answer 12 of these questions. And what happens is, typically speaking, with 12 questions, we get clear insight into what one individual likes, as well as what does the whole sample like. And what I personally really also like is this person, what are features about him that might make him lean in this direction or this direction? So we can also sub-analyze individuals or groups. For example, Are people that prefer iPhone less price sensitive? Well, if I'm a betting man, I would say yes. Whereas do people that prefer Sony phones prefer smaller phones? It's actually, their Sony Compact is one of the more famous phones they have. So these are more nuanced elements that you can dive in deeper once you've done a conjoint analysis. So that's the entire recap. That's basically what I spent an hour on yesterday. So now let's have a look at some general rules and then dive into linking more the in-depth material. So typically speaking, when we're talking about attributes, include what's important to you, but also what's important to your competitor. So if you want to create a conjoint analysis in which you compare your product with a competitor, make sure that they know what entices people to buy your product versus a competitor. So if you're an iPhone, also mention what makes Samsung or Sony so unique. Yeah, so Samsung has a quite famous screen, was it OLED design, I believe, and Sony could be high camera quality system or something like that. The reason I say include also attributes that are important for your competitors is we want to create a real life or an as real life decision as possible. And if there's something omitted that might sway them in the shop, we'll get less valid data. Now, it's important in the same way to use clear and understandable wording, as in figure out who you're addressing and who you want to get information on, and pick terminology that fits to them. So if I'm testing smartphones on a demographic that's 85 plus, it probably doesn't make too much sense to focus my conjoint analysis on 4K, the amount of gigabytes, milliamperes, and so on. They probably want to know how much storage can it have, does it have bigger font size, and so on. Okay, so think of which group you're targeting and pick the terminology that makes it understandable to them. Another way to make it understandable or more attainable would be adding visual stimuli and logos. So whenever you simply add a logo, and in my case, I sometimes use fake logos for my training sessions, it adds realism and you can see more consistent results. So confidence intervals get smaller when there's a visual or brand logo specific element to it. I see a question pop up from Heather. Does it make sense to pre-test the attributes to include? My boss will always say, yes, please. As in, I typically would, but what we often see is you can do, most of the time we limit the amount of attributes we look at in one study design to 7. The reason I say 7 is because if you have more than 7 attributes, and when you'll see the example, you understand why, it becomes visually cluttered. So that's why we typically say if you have a list of 20 attributes, then maybe first do a max diff. And a max diff is nothing more than just a ranking, like what is most important, what is least important, to figure out which attributes do people find most important and which least. We have a few companies that do this all the time. So they first do a max diff to figure out which attributes the people care about the most, and then they put those in a conjoint analysis. But if you already have a product that has, let's say, 5 or 6 attributes, and you don't really have additional elements you need to add, I would say, please don't tell my boss, but maybe you can just directly do a conjoint because you'll gain very broad information. And then if you want to look more in depth into the pricing, then you can switch to either a pricing oriented conjoint or a BPTO design. I hope that answers it. One thing you can also do, this is what a lot of our clients do, is in the chat, you say, hey, can I have a 20-minute call to go over my attribute list? And then because we've done this ad nauseum a lot, we can go, okay, this one will never have an impact, so you can exclude this. Or this could be very interesting and so on. So we can just look at fields or a similar field we might have already done research on. But good question. Thank you. So another element, if you're including competitors, include the most important competitors. If you're iPhone, don't compare yourself to the WeCycle phone, so the one from recycled material. No, you have to compare yourself to Huawei, to Samsung, and so on, because again, if it's a distributed market with various options, make sure it's as real life as possible, the decision. And I always get the question, include price or not? I would say if you're testing the concept design, so let's say you're working on furniture, something like an IKEA shop. You want to just figure out what concept, what type of legs, what type of armrest, what the headrest, and so on do people like. That's concept testing. You don't really need price. Still probably would add it, but you don't need it. However, the second, price can play a role, as in how expensive it has to be, how much it costs to make, what are people willing to pay, and things like that. Then add price as an attribute, because price is something interesting. It allows us to calculate two different elements, one called price elasticity of demand, a fancy way of saying what happens if I increase my price to the amount demanded by the market. So you can imagine in times of high inflation, which we have right now, at least in Europe, as we have to increase our prices, we have to be aware, what is that going to do to our preference or market shares? That's price elasticity demand. And marginal willingness to pay is one I'm a big fan of. It simply shows you how much is somebody willing to pay to go from A to B. So how much more is somebody willing to pay to go from a Samsung to an iPhone, or from a 5-inch phone to a 5.5-inch phone? So price can be a very important metric here. Now, which type of design to use depends a little bit on something we call stages of innovation. Now, stages of innovation simply means, what are you trying to figure out with market research? Yeah, so in what way is market research the tool that's best going to answer your question? So I'm talking about generic conjoint today, but generic conjoint falls under a numer or a branch called discrete choice experiments, abbreviated as DCE. And generic conjoint is one, but we also have things like brand specific conjoint. The only differentiation here actually is like, which different combinations do you want to test? Then we have brand price trade-off. That's a conjoint design, but heavily focused on pricing. So if the only thing you're really interested in is maybe changing your pack shot, launching an MPD, and pricing, maybe think about BPTO, brand price trade-off. Claims testing, well, the name speaks for itself. That's claims, slogans, and things like that testing. Product variant selector, what type of 6 bottles of soda do people like the most? Basically, you just want to know which variation of a product do people like the most. So this could be, does an orange label work better than a blue label, a green label, and so on. So as you can see on the right, I try to break it down into different stages of innovation. Sometimes they overlap, so let's have a look. If you're looking at the concept or feature, remember the IKEA example. That's when you're probably going to stick to either a simplistic conjoint, as you see here. So this is one for cars. So what color car do you like? What engine type? How many doors do you need? And what engine capacity? Very bare bones, very simplistic, just figuring out the concept. And we have a product variant selected. That's which of these bottles of soda do you like the most? And the monadic test is nothing more than asking questions about single items. So as you can see in both the example at the top and at the bottom, we're showing you multiple options. With a monadic test, we show you one option. We show you, for example, the grapefruit soda. What do you like? What don't you like? How much are you willing to pay for this? And so on. That's a monadic design. Claims testing, figuring out what claims works best. That's typically done with a claims test, which looks like this. Very similar to a conjoint design, slightly different mathematics. So here you can see which of the statements would make you buy something the most. You can also add a brand to this, and then it becomes a brand-specific conjoint. In this case, we have naturally the best with made from 100% fresh ingredients and so on. That's claims testing. Then we have pricing research. Pricing research I find very interesting. So that's, as I mentioned, generic conjoint or brand-specific, brand price trade-off. On the top right here, we see a generic conjoint. Now, please don't be too harsh on the design. That was me with 5 minutes in paint. But so you can see we have that brand, we have a visual stimuli, we have source and so on. And we just want to figure out, okay, what do people like? What don't they like when it comes to attributes and levels, as well as what's the monetary worth of specific elements. BPTO, most of the time looks a lot fancier. Finished product design, and the only thing that really changes is for example, the pack design and the price. So this is really focused on pricing elements. Then comparing with competitors, that's kind of the same, because you can see I already had 2 brands here in the generic conjoint and multiple brands and so on. So you can also do that with a brand specific conjoint. Now, typically speaking, these are the main clusters we use, but you can add claims to a concept test, as in which claim seems to work best for people. If you think again about IKEA, do people care more that it's recycled material? Do people care more that I can make it within an hour? Do people care more that it has 2-year warranty and so on? And so that could be claims testing within concept testing, or adding price to concept testing, as in what do people find interesting monetarily speaking. So those are the stages of innovation, and I now want to bring it a bit more to life by talking about Netflix. Now, the reason I chose Netflix is they're making a decision that could be very interesting for market research. Now, this is just me having fun and being a teacher and trying to figure things out. This is not paid for by Netflix or anything like that, so there's no advertisement linked here. But so I was just curious. So Netflix has confirmed that they will be adding advertisement to its current streaming services. And I just wanted to figure out what's going to happen. As in, are people going to switch to other brands? Are people going to simply switch to a higher payment tier and so on? So what is the impact of Netflix adding advertisements to its current streaming services? Now, based on that, I quickly figured out a generic conjoint is a very good way to go in this case. And I came up with 4 questions that I want to answer today. The first is, when it comes to streaming services, what features or attributes do people prefer? So what are important elements when it comes to streaming services? Now, you can probably think, well, that's going to be brand and price. I also thought of things like, well, advertisement, of course, but also how do they release content? Is that weekly? Is that the binge drop route or the Stranger Things route? So partially then, partially then, partially then, and so on. So we are going to look at a few attributes. I want to figure out at what price point is something like Netflix interesting compared to something like Hulu, compared to HBO Max and so on. I want to figure out what are people willing to pay to avoid ads. This is probably the main question that Netflix has. How much are you willing to pay to not have this issue? Because if you're clever, you just put ads in your cheapest version, figure out how much people are willing to pay to not have ads, and miraculously make your second payment tier. So I think in Netflix, it's basic and standard. Make your standard just below that threshold of willingness to pay. And I want to see, are they going to lose a lot of clients or a lot of viewers when it comes to including ads? So that was the main goal. And so this is a bit more of a complicated conjoint analysis, and exactly why I chose it for Conjoint 102. So whenever you create a design or study design, you have to think of the survey flow. Ergo, what is the experience going to be like for respondents? So what do I start with? What do I end with? And so on. If I start with the first question, hey, Netflix costs this much. How much are you willing to pay? That's, first of all, that's an anchored heuristic, an anchor heuristic question relating to pricing. If I then do a conjoint analysis, you're going to be biased by the numbers I call there. So you have to think, what will be the survey flow? Well, I have an overview for that. And the first is, the very first questions you're going to ask somebody are relating to, are they going to be included into your survey or not? So these are the screening questions. Who gets into your study design and who doesn't? Now, if you use our custom or predefined panels, you don't really have to do this, but you have to think of which criteria you want to set. So with one of the experiments I recently did for a product concept test, I looked at augmented reality glasses. It makes sense to look at early technology adapters because you don't want to ask somebody that's even now thinking, I'm not sure about smartphones if the hype is all there. You don't want to ask them about specific new technologies. You want to ask people that are very likely to buy something new. So my screening questions were, are you an early adapter of new technology? And how often do you buy a new graphics card? How often do you buy a new smartphone and so on? So that I have criteria questions. So who's to be included? Can be country, region, age related. If you're testing, in my case, I was testing the US market with Netflix. I need a question about country because there's different streaming services in different countries. So all you have to do is indicate which questions you want and which answers they should give in order to be allowed into the study. Then the next part, so it can look something like this: age, demographic, gender, or in my case, I had a question, who pays for the streaming service? If you're not the one paying, then your data might be less reliable. I still let them in my case, but that could be a very good screening question criteria. And the key questions. Key questions are basically what you're most interested in. So that's to answer your real research questions. That's a conjoint analysis, that's your BPTO, that's your claims design, and so on. In my case, it looks something like this. So which of the following streaming services would you choose? And in this case, I got the offer between Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, wow, they really like their pluses, and Hulu, for different prices with different options about shareable access, number of active screens, video quality, and so on. Yeah, so these are the attributes. The attributes can be seen on the left, and we already see variations of the levels basically in every column. Again, they don't just answer this once or twice, they answer this roughly 12 times. And then I get a clear insight into what an individual likes. And what I like doing then is, okay, so now I know what Bob, for example, likes. But I want to know more about Bob and see in what categories does Bob fit. In which case, you add profiling questions. These are questions you can use to create subsegments. So this can be purchase behavior. How many streaming services do you have? Which streaming services do you have? How many hours a day do you watch TV? And so on. Yeah, so you can add those questions. It's all very easy. You can select from a wide variety of options, from multiple choice, drop-down menus, rankings, and so on. And you can create questions like this. So what type of household do you have? In this case, that gives me insight into probably how likely are they going to share their account. Or annual income. That is often a very important indicator when it comes to high purchase items like cars or houses or even insurance, I would say, and so on. So in my case, I added a custom question like, which of the following streaming services do you currently have? And I adapted that to be the US one. Accidentally, I left Sky Sport in there because I've also done this for the UK. That should have been something like ESPN Plus, but I believe ESPN is linked with Disney nowadays or something. So not the biggest issue. You can add additional questions relating to demographic. If you want broader information like employment status, educational level, or in my case, I added a Van Wessendorp. Ergo added asking, at what price would you find a video streaming service too cheap that it can't be of good quality, a bargain, starting to get expensive, and simply too expensive? Can be interesting, but Van Wessendorp mainly works well when it's brand related, because then you get a clearer picture of what you're paying for. Because if I ask you, at what price point are you willing to pay for Apple TV? You're going to give me much lower values than for Netflix or Amazon Prime plus Discovery or something like that. And the final thing before I start showing you what it's like to create this is the advanced settings. So a few of you are probably already familiar with this. These are the things that can really make your study unique. Sometimes it makes sense to add them, not always. One I sometimes add is something like prohibited pairs, which you can see looks something like this. So in this case, I made the conscious decision to not show the cheapest price point with the highest options, as in, I'll never give you the cheapest price for 4K or 8K or 5 people watching at the same time or 6 screens for downloads and so on. Now, I often get the question, do I need prohibited pairs? I would say if you have a lot of them, that means you're not supposed to do a generic conjoint, but switch to a brand-specific conjoint, because you can simply say, only show this brand with these price points and so on. So it's a more adaptable one. However, if we're looking at something like only one option should not be shown with combinations, so in this case I chose the cheapest price point, then it's fine to do. What I often also see people do is simply not have this, and you're going to see that people want Netflix for $3.99 in 8K. But all you have to do is go, yeah, that's not realistic. What's the next best option? That's an alternative to do as well. You can force people to stay in a question for a specific amount of time. That is a very popular choice. I often recommend doing that, especially when you have at least 5 attributes, because people need time to read. And you can have questions relating to display logic. So only show a follow-up question if they answer A, B, or C. So in my case, here I have a contingency that gives them a screen out, ergo kicks them out of my study if they're not the one paying for streaming service. Now, I didn't include this one at the end because I'm also curious about what people think who are not paying the bill, but it's a very simple design to set up. So that's the survey flow. But that's a lot of theory and a lot of PowerPoint. So let's have a look at what it's like to create this in the platform. So let me just jump on over to Conjointly. To launch an experiment, you simply create your free Conjointly account, or in my case, sign in. It opens on Launch New Experiment, and you click on the experiment you want to launch, in this case, generic conjoint. It creates a template, and all you have to do is start adjusting this to things like video streaming service, and so on. You can see it already comes preloaded with a few attributes and levels. But let's take the cooking show route and just show you what it's like if you spend 5 to 10 minutes on it. Here we got streaming services. I classify it as something that people routinely buy because I believe it's become so embedded in our everyday lives. My attributes on the left, I've got my brand, also labeled as a brand. The brands I'm testing are Netflix, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Prime Video, Apple TV Plus, Paramount Plus, and Hulu. All of these are being shown as logos, not as text, simply because that, again, brings it more to life. Different price points from $3.99 to $19.99. Number of active screens, 1 to 6. Shareable account, 1 person only, up to 5 people. Video quality, SD to 8K. Release of episodic content, purely because when I was creating this study, Stranger Things was released, and Stranger Things did partial release at monthly intervals, so I was curious if people actually like that. And then I have simultaneous same-day release, so the famous Netflix drop, or weekly release. And then the very interesting one about ads. So in this case, instead of just having does it not include ads versus ads, I thought there might be different ways of including ads. So I have an option that says has no ads. Then I have includes ads on home and search screen. So when you open Netflix, there's going to be an ad, and when you're searching for something, there might be an ad above your banner as well. Then I have includes ads at the beginning and end of a movie. So what YouTube used to have. Then I included what makes YouTube almost unwatchable sometimes nowadays, namely includes ads during the movie at 10 minutes intervals or at 5-minute intervals. So those, so we have ads home and search screen beginning and end of a movie, and at specific intervals. Let me just load it in the background already. Then you can, of course, adjust your template. In my case, I did it very simplistic. I did US Gen Pop. It's giving me an error now because of a screen up, but typically this will give you the price estimation. What I could have also done is use a predefined panel and, for example, look at people. Let's see if there's something relating to streaming. Yep. So if I'm doing this study in Brazil and I'm looking for people with subscriptions to streaming services, I can just click this. And if our custom panel isn't there, then you just right here, and then probably Meichi is going to be the first one replying at the moment, and she will create a custom panel for you. The advanced settings, remember prohibited pairs. So the cheapest option, $3.99, should not be shown with 6 screens, 5 people, and so on. You can also adjust how many alternatives are being shown per choice set. And so do you show 3 options next to each other, 4, 5, and so on. I think 5 is the max, yes. Analytical options, your confidence intervals. If you're testing medical drugs, put this higher, but typically speaking, 90% is perfectly fine. I always activate our quality management elements, so people with the same IP address cannot do the survey twice. Same with cookies and so on. Then here, if people don't scroll, so basically what happens is our system can pick up if it's shown on the entire screen or if it's not on the entire screen. And if people then don't scroll, they'll get a warning. And if they're going too fast, they get a warning saying, it looks like you're going too quickly. You can also translate. I didn't do that this time, but you can. Then the additional question, I got my gender and age questions. So I have a screen out related to age. Let's see the display logic. So if the age is less than 18 or if the age is greater than 80, I just chose those for no specific reason except most likely the people that are paying are between 18 and 79. Entertaining streaming services and so on. So you can see I added a bunch of questions. Might look complicated. All you literally do is click add question, either create it yourself, like adding a Gabor Granger or a Messendorp, or a screen out or something like that. But what I typically actually do is I just go here and see, okay, what do people have for streaming service? So here we see the question that I used as a template and so on. One I do want to highlight is I added a Gabor Granger in this case, saying, are you willing to pay an additional monthly fee to be for a streaming service to be ad-free? So I want to see, what do people say yes to when it comes to not having ads? So interesting question, and I want to see what's the monetary value of being ad-free. Again, this would work better if I actually call it, instead of streaming service, for Netflix to be ad-free, but I wanted to make it a bit broader in this case. So let's look at the survey. Opens with the intro. Gender question, age question. Please close your eyes. What do I have? I don't have Netflix anymore since doing this study, to be honest. There was a bit of a bias. I think that's it. This for the most part. Movies, yeah, it doesn't matter too much. Something like this. And then you get a Van Wessendorp question. So would you buy this product at all? If I say yes, I'm shown the Van Wessendorp. If I say no, it skips automatically to the Conjoint. And in this case, I got the option between Prime Video for $11.99, another Prime for $13.99, and so on. Now, I don't have a 4K TV, so that interests me a lot less, and it's $19.99. I do watch Prime Video. I did like the terminal list and Reacher and so on. One person, SD, 4 screens, but ads at 10 woo. So I don't like really any of them. So actually, I might even go with Hulu in this case. Did not expect that choice. And so on. And you can see, well, this is a very cheap version of Disney Plus. It's full HD, but it's ads at 5 minutes. So this is how people go through them. What we also do is we can pay attention to how is their mouse moving, how does it go from left to right, and so on. Apple TV has some interesting stuff, but I'm going to go HBO Max in this case. So this is how people make their choices. And for example, with the first choice that I had where I wasn't sure, I could have also selected none of the above. Now I have none of the above apparently visible here. You can also have it below here. The reason I have it quite predominantly in view is I want people to clearly indicate if they don't like something. Because then everything, so if I select none of the above, all of these are going to get a negative weight. So basically, I tell my mathematical model, yeah, these are not liked options. Another question. Do you ever find it useful to understand people's detailed choice logic? I got a similar question, I think, yesterday relating to choice trees. So I find it useful. Unfortunately, I don't. With a conjoint, we can only figure out what people tend to prefer. We can't figure out what is the first part they look at. We can ask them, but to be honest, in my background is in psychology. Asking somebody what did you look at first, 9 out of 10 times doesn't really give the actual answer. Thinking about the qual complement. Yeah. I often add that. I didn't do it for this one because at the moment we're switching between word clouds, open text. So if somebody fills an open text, we currently make word clouds, but we're switching to AI text summaries. So one I like is mouse tracking. So you could create something like this. And so let me show you here. We have image heat mapping. That's one I like. And what I typically then do is I make one conjoint decision as a still image and just ask them to please look at it. Pop up here. So I ask them to, which of these would you like the most? And they don't realize they're not yet in conjoint. And I can see they're first looking here, then they're looking here, then they're looking here, and so on. Eye tracking we don't do. Simply because we're a very, let's say, not per se simplistic, but we're a specialized product for online. The bigger companies do that. I'm trying to think of the name. They're in Rotterdam. Yeah. So if you're looking for more in-depth qual or eye tracking and things like that, what is their name? It might pop back into my head. There's one that also has an office in Rotterdam, not that far from here. But indeed, adding open-ended question nowadays, we also do AI summaries. So you can get basically a short report of what people like, and you can also segment that and so on. So this is what it looks like. Then when people start making choices, we start doing math. A question from Marek. Section option on the first screen, see inferior in every aspect. Let me go back for you. Is this the first one? No. There we go. Seem inferior in every aspect. Higher price, lower screens. Yeah, this is so partial release versus simultaneous send. I would agree with you, yeah. Is there any mechanism that blocks showing options with parameter levels that make the preference between them trivial? Very good question, Marek. Thank you for that. There is a way to make sure that there is only one version of each brand being shown. So in this case, I would not have two options of Prime, but one of the Primes would be switched for Apple Plus or Disney Plus. So, but I don't think there's a way to guarantee that, for example, Hulu would not be worse in every single measure because it works with a randomization function, unfortunately. A very good question. So you can do it that there's only one brand option, but I can't. I mean, we can, but we'd have to customly program it, unfortunately. But good question. I'm actually going to copy and paste that comment, and I'm going to put that into our development team's Slack, if you don't mind, Merrick. I always like that idea. Okay, so we collect that data, we figure out what people like and what they don't like, in this case, the second choice. Um, and what we do then in the background is we do some mathematics. We calculate what is called utility scores. Utility scores have a lot of different names, apart from a few utilities, attribute importance scores, level values, conjoint analysis utilities. Just Google it and you'll find a lot of them. And it's basically just a numerical score or a numerical expression to tell you how important is a specific element when it comes to choosing. Now, the way that works, and I'm just going to go very briefly over it and then show you the results, which is a lot more interesting. We start by first converting all the choices people make. So we create what is called a choice matrix. It also looks like the matrix. It's just a bunch of ones and zeros most of the time, unless you have price, which we can also express in the actual numerical value. Then all we do is we try to train a regression model based on all these ones and zeros to figure out what did people choose. Now, whenever you create a regression, if you remember from maybe high school, uni, or wherever, it has a formula something like ax plus b or beta 0 plus beta 1 times x. You have to figure out those weights. Now, the way we do that is with a optimization method we call Monte Carlo Markov chain hierarchical base. Again, you can forget this as soon as you hear it, but I just want to show you the way it works. So you can see in the beginning, our model is quite inaccurate. And over time, as we go through, actually, well, I think it's 20,000 iterations, to be honest, because we only collect data from every 10th. So we do 20,000 iterations, but we collect data from every 10th. And you can see the closer we get to the high numbers, the more narrow the data cloud plot becomes. And then what we actually do is we calculate the weight based on the last 250 points. The reason for that is we estimate that that average is going to be the best estimation for the weights. So we give coefficients for each respondent. So what did Bob like, what did Mary like, what did Sue like, and so on, as well as what attribute was most important, what level was most important, and so on. So that's what's happening under the hood, but that's really more something if you're interested in the mathematics. If you want that, I have a webinar called Statistics Intro, but not important right now. Let's switch back to Netflix and answer those 4 main questions. So what feature attributes do people like most when it comes to streaming services? What price points do they have in mind for streaming services? What are they willing to pay to avoid ads? And what is going to be the impact of including ads for Netflix? So let's have a look at that. And everything I used is actual data. So you can see the website down here. It is already 2 months old, unfortunately. 3 months, wow, time flies. 3 months old since I've updated because I collect data on one day. I want it so it's valid for that day. So we can see I gathered 255 respondents, and I simply click View Report. I already have it open here. First thing you're going to see in the Insights tab is attribute importance. Now, the Insights tab is nothing more, it's already quite impressive. It's the overview of the study results. Now we have time series. This is more if you do longitudinal research. We have cross tabs in case you have segments. We have simulations, probably my favorite thing in the world. Pivot tables in case you want to make custom tables. Segments that you can then use in your cross-tab section, and weighing models. So in the Insights tab, the first one you see is attribute importance. We can see price is the most important factor, not surprising. But it's closely followed by brand. And the third most important is actually advertisement. Things like shareable account, which surprises me because I think all my subscriptions I share with friends or family. is even less important than, for example, the release of episodic content. And we can look at the confidence intervals, and we can see these are relatively narrow confidence intervals, so quite consistent decisions. So that's attribute importance, price, brand, and so on. If you remember, I also have questions about who pays or how old are you and things like that. Now, I made segments based on that. So I have male, female, pays the bill, doesn't pay the bill, and so on. I can either look in crosstabs and see which attribute was most important. So here we see for men, brand is slightly more important than for women, but women find price more important than men, and men hate advertisements more. So it can either look like this or simply switch like this. The one I want to highlight is paying bills, which I find a very interesting result. People that pay the bill, yes, price is important in brand, but people that don't pay the bill actually find price important. I'm going to guess this is based on like a guilty conscience. Like if you're not the one paying and you hear that it's getting more expensive, you might feel that you're being more obtrusive or something like that. I see another question from Heather. What if only a certain level of an attribute is important? If that is the one that sways people's decisions the most, then it will still have a very high relative importance for that attribute. What then you're going to find is here in preference for levels is that one option is going to be heavily skewed towards the right. So in this case, the lowest price is by far the most preferred, and so on. Yeah, exactly as Marek mentions. So in this case, the attribute importance is based on those utility scores that we calculated, the ones we get over here. And so if there's one element that really drives basically our coefficients in a very specific direction, either on the respondent level or the attribute or level, then we'll get that direction as well. So in this case, we have our price, we have our brand, so we can see what element was basically in the favorite combination, which is a combination of our ranked list. And the preference for levels, this is slightly different. This is zero-centered, meaning what's on the left-hand side value-wise is equal to what's on the right-hand side value-wise. So in this case, it's simply which combination, or if we break down the levels into each attribute, which combination was most chosen. So this links to what Marek mentions. If we look at the distribution for preference for levels, this is the general description that we would get. So here you can see Netflix was the most preferred, then HBO Max, and so on. And what this tries to answer is, considering that each consumer likes one specific level, what is the distribution of preferences for different levels? So if we go all the way back here, we can see that for the brand, Netflix had the most selections, followed by Amazon Prime, and people did not like Apple TV at all. For the price, we see $3.99 being the most interested option. That goes all the way to $19.99 with a jump here. Why that jump is, it could be the amount of exposure, because I do have a lot of levels I'm testing for this specific attribute. My guess is also people like the value $19.99. That's a bit of psychology there. But so this, in this case, I will always look at the confidence intervals. And in this case, yes, they're significantly different. But I would probably dive more in depth and see how often was Netflix shown at $19.99 and so on. Yeah, it looks like a bargain. Indeed, Marek, I completely agree. Beauty of human psychology. This jump is interesting. This is when I would always dive a bit more in depth into the results. If we look at the number of active screens, the distribution, so as we already saw, it is not the most important attribute. So slight preferred for higher values, but yeah, compared to price or brand, it's a lot more minute. Same with shareable access. Remarkably, even up to 3, slightly preferred over up to 4. But however, again, with confidence intervals, I would say, don't make heavy business decisions based on this differentiation. SD is the only one people really don't like. Most people have full HD TVs, and 8K, I think, is only computer screens, or I don't know if there's TV screens already for that. There should be, there probably are. Again, content release, people don't like the Stranger Things idea, so partial release at monthly intervals. No preference is no preference. And weekly release and simultaneous same-day release, again, very similar findings. And if we look at the includes ads, so this was the fun part. Does not include any ads is, of course, the most preferred. The next most preferred is at the beginning or at the end, then the search page and the home bar. But you can see people don't like ads at intervals. The reason I try to avoid YouTube more and more is simply those interval ads. So this is already a little bit of information that's quite interesting. Now we're going to look at marginal willingness to pay. Now the description we give it here is it's the amount of money consumers are willing to pay for a particular feature on average. That's not actually the exact calculation. The exact calculation relates to the median individual, and it's basically what is the trade-off the median, so the 50th percentile would make to switch from A to B. So at which price range does the median individual tend to switch from option A to B? So in this case, we can see, I'm just going to simplify that for now and just say the average consumer, because median and average hopefully are roughly the same. So we can see that Netflix has clear monetary worth over everything, because that's my baseline. Amazon Prime is the one that gets closest to it. Of course, in this study, I did not incorporate the fact that Amazon Prime also has free delivery for Amazon, simply because it would make the study even more complicated. We got Disney Plus, and Apple TV has no monetary worth. Number of active screens, so we can see how much the average individual or the median individual is roughly willing to pay for this. Some amount, interesting already. Shareable access surprised me. Video quality, again, people just don't want SD. But let's look at ads. So let me set no ads as the baseline. There we go. They're willing to pay on average 20 cents more to not have ads compared to ads on home screen. Then 60 cents more to not have ads compared to beginning and ending. And you can see for those intervals, there's also monetary worth behind it. So this is basically between $2.30 and $3.12. Now, what I like about marginal willingness to pay is if you combine it with preference for levels, you get interesting insights. So here we see a clear distribution. These two are not liked, and they also don't have monetary value. Sometimes it actually might be reversed, and that's when you jump to the simulations. I'm going to do that in a second, but remember I had a Gabor Granger asking, what are people willing to pay to not have ads? First of all, 36% people refuse to pay additional money to not have ads. I can understand that. They'll go, they're going to add ads anyway, so I'm not going to pay extra for it. So the highest value I can get is 63.9%, which we see here. And so 63.9% says they're willing to pay 50 cents to not have ads. And as you can see, as the price increases, fewer people agree to it. So less than 50% indicate willing to pay more than $3.50 to not have ads. Now, the reason I want to highlight this is that, so $3.50 we had right here. That's a similar indication as marginal willingness to pay indicated for these intensive types of ads. So it's already, instead of looking at it from one direction, we're already looking at two directions. We have an idea that probably people are willing to pay roughly between $2 and $3.50 to not have invasive ads. So in case anybody from Netflix is joining, please feel free to use that data freely. We got our simulations tab. And what I like about the simulations tab, is instead of looking at the general results, we can create concepts and ask our trained underlying mathematical model based on those utility scores, what will be the preference share distribution? Now, preference shares is not the same as market shares because I have no idea what you spend on advertisements. I don't know what the store looks like. I don't know, are you top shelf, bottom shelf, and so on. And there's a lot of other things that come into play before preference shares become market shares. But so what I did is I first just looked at the baseline. What if we just have one of them? Well, that's not what the market looks like. So let me just make one that's called all current options. And so here we can see I have 3 options for Netflix: Netflix Basic, Standard, and Premium. HBO Max with ads and no ads. I didn't even know that in the US they had ads. Disney Plus, and then we have Disney Plus Bundle, Amazon Prime, and so on. So this was an actual reflection of what it was like on the 8th of August. And what you can see, Netflix in red appears to be the most predominant force, as we kind of know. But that Amazon Prime also has quite a bit of the market share. Disney is quite big, and Apple TV surprised me, to be honest. So all of these elements relating to active screens and so on, they've all been adjusted based on their actual standards. And what I can do now is I can play around and go, okay, so what if I switch this to simultaneous same-day release? Or what if I include ads like this and so on? So let's just have a look and say Netflix drops that idea that they tried with Stranger Things. It clearly was not popular. So let's switch all of these to simultaneous same-day release. It was 6.6, 5.8, and 6.3. Let's see what happens. 6.6, 5.8, 6.3. I don't think it's going to have that massive an impact, but let's have a look. And this is taking longer than it normally does, so somebody's updating something on our server side. I'll let that load for a little bit. Now let me just try to remember 6.6, 5.8, 6.3. What you can then do in the same way I'm tweaking it now for episode of content release, you can do the same for ads. And what I can do is look at the current options that we have and say, what if the cheapest version, what is it, Netflix Basic, we have right here. What if Netflix Basics has either no ads, ads on home screen, and so on. Then here you can see the Netflix elements, but it's hard to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide all the other ones. Well, that takes a while. So let me just show you what I already made. And here you can see what happens when Netflix includes ads or different ad types in their cheapest version. The first thing you're probably going to notice is their total doesn't really decrease, even increases for some reason, with the simplistic ads, so the home screen ad and the beginning and ending ad. But what Netflix is most interested in is what happens to that basic. So if there's no ads, it's 6.6. If there's ads on the home screen, it's 6.5. So I lose some people. What happens if I include ads at 5-minute intervals? 4.2% or 4.5%. So we can see that including ads reduces the amount of people in the basic one. But Netflix is a clever company. They know that's probably going to happen. Their hope is that instead of you leaving to another company, you switch to one of the other packages. So let's have a look. 5.8 and 6.3. That becomes 5.9 and 6.3. So that percentage you lose here switches to standard. Good news for Netflix. It simply means you get more money because people switch to standard. Let's have a look at the other ones, the more intensive ones. So again, we had 5.8 and 6.3, 6.1 and 6.5, or 6.1 and 6.5. So here you can see we figured out that people are willing to pay a specific amount of money to avoid ads. But instead of just paying that instead of just increasing their lowest payment tier, Netflix is actually quite clever in just saying, no, we're going to add ads to the cheapest one. And what people are probably automatically going to do is they're going to switch to one higher payment tier. At least that's a tendency we see here. Now, I do want to note that with the two most intensive ones, the interval commercials or ads, the total percentage does decrease. So that is a risk. However, especially ads on home screen and for some reason the ads at the beginning and ending don't seem to impact the preference scores that we found. So that is quite interesting to see. Is there a method for package structure optimization, or is it manually exploratory? You can use, let me show it as well. Where do I have it? You can, typically speaking, I personally, because this is a very complicated one, I have a million different options and I can tweak everything. And when you're manually tweaking, typically tweak one by one, because otherwise you don't know where does the change come from if you're changing 5 things at the same time. We do have an optimization feature here. The optimization depends on what do you want to keep fixed and what do you want to basically change in order for the preference score to be optimized. So you could say price is fixed and the quality is fixed and so on, and then you can optimize based on that. I would do this if I know exactly what you're looking for. So when I work for clients that say, I'm going to make this, then I'll use the optimize function to figure out, okay, this is what you're making. This is the optimized preference or the optimized combination of attributes and levels for the highest preference score. We can also look at things like price sensitivity. And so what price sensitivity basically just indicates is what happens to the preference shares if we increase the price. Now this is, I believe, Netflix. Yeah, this is basic Netflix. You can see if you go all the way to $19.99, you're going to lose some preference shares. And this makes me happy and links also to Marek's comment. If we look in the Insights tab for the levels, we might have the idea that $19.99 seems to be a better choice than $15.99 or $17.99. But in our simulations, it could be that for something like Amazon or Hulu, we don't find this trend, but for the majority, we're going to find a declining price elasticity demand. So that's a lot of information. I see that I've gone over time. My apologies for that. What I just want to do now is wrap up the conclusions for Netflix, then give you a short summary, and then set you all free. My apologies for going over time. I got a bit too enthusiastic today. So price is the most important feature for a streaming service, at least according to our survey, followed by brands and ads. The average consumer is willing to pay 10 to 15 a month for a streaming service, with Netflix having the highest monetary value. That second one I didn't show. That was actually Van Wessendorp. Where's my Van Wessendorp? Here. So, well, what price would you consider the following streaming product, a streaming service? $10 to $15. Again, it's not brand specific. It was more like general information. It's between 10 and 15 bucks. I'm not the biggest fan of Van Wessendorp, but it can be a useful tool at times. We saw that from willingness to pay, that people are willing to pay between 50 cents and $3.50 to not have ads. We found similar information from Gabor Granger as well, that 36% said, I'm not going to pay additional money to not have ads. And finally, when we're talking about ads on home screen or start and end of a video, movie, it didn't really seem to impact preference shares that much or actually switch them to higher payment plans. If Netflix is here today, and first of all, hi Netflix. Secondly, I would recommend that they think well, long and hard about having the interval type commercials, because those seem to have an impact. And of course, we're just asking you, hey, would you think would happen? I can imagine that the actual response in the market might even be a bit more pronounced. That's just my 2 cents about it. So that is everything about Conjoint Analysis 102 when it comes to Netflix. Let me just switch to my summary. So a generic conjoint is a very useful method of a discrete choice experiment. Which type of discrete choice experiment to use depends on where you are in your basically your conceptualization of your product and so on. You have to keep in mind that survey flow. So start with screening questions, then have your main block as well as questions that you're going to use for things like segmentations or weighing a model or something like that. And then the powerful utilities, I talked about them very briefly because I ran out of time. They're used to calculate attribute importance, level preference, marginal willingness to pay, and so on. And there's a few limitations you have to keep in mind when working with conjoint analysis. For example, they're not a one-on-one reflection of market shares. Okay. So that's it from my side. Once again, apologies for going over time. Let me see if there's anything in the chat. For those that have to jump to a next meeting, if you have questions, either write to support@conjointly.com, use that chat with us function and talk to, today it's going to be Angelica Fanos, I think Maria's back as well, and Antonio. I'll be on it as of next week again. Or look me up on LinkedIn and ask me the question there. That's also always a viable option. Okay, thank you all for joining. Let me have a look if there's any questions popping up. Marek, very happy to hear that. If you want a call or something like that, just let us know. In general, the tool's meant to be easy. You clearly know what you're talking about. I can tell that from your questions and remarks. So it's a very easy tool to use. And just one thing that might make you happy as well, or at least some of our higher end clients or higher cognitive clients, however you want to put it, you can also weigh your models and, for example, give higher weight to people with higher income or people. I always use this for things like probiotic yogurts, which is something I always end up doing research on. People that indicate that they buy weekly probiotic yogurts get a higher weight in my mathematical model than people that indicate buying once every 2 months. You can even add continuous data relating to either sales or get variables and so on. So you can create your own formulas there. Could be something interesting. So, looking forward to hearing something from you in the future, Marek. And I see something from Heather. The presentation, I believe Conjoint 102 is not on YouTube yet. If you want, I can share a recording. Basically, I can share the recording from today if you'd like. And just as a reminder, if you want the slides, and my slides actually have a few hidden ones as well, they're relating more to those utility scores, things like how attribute part widths are calculated and so on. Simply click on that apps button with the 3 dots over it. Go to handouts, and there you can find it. Or if you'd like the recording, I can send that along with the recording. Okay. However, I'll just look up your information and send an email with the slide deck and the video from today your way. Okay. Any other questions left? Let me just go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Marek, by the way, I think you're still there. If you also want the recording and PowerPoint, just let me know. Okay. Thank you all for joining today. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. Again, thank you for joining. Thank you for asking questions and making the webinar a lot more fun for me. And so, yeah, I hope to see you all in the future and have a lovely day. Have a good one.